Now you might have noticed on the last video that when I clicked this icon here to go back in and mark the invoices being paid in full, you might have noticed that there was an amount sitting here. This should have been 000 in normal cases. I'm going, well, I even looked at that myself and I'm thinking, what sort of is going on here? And it took me a few minutes to work out what was happening. What it is, if I go back to the actual invoice, we noticed that I had actually entered in that this client here had to pay 20% tax on this particular item. Remember when I was mucking around showing you how all this worked? So here's an example. Let's say that someone was tax exempt for a particular item. You would not normally then go ahead and use those tax calculators because they apply to the default rate of tax. Because remember, it's only an accounting program. It's basically dumb. Don't use this. If you know you've collected a certain rate of tax specific to a certain amount, because this particular invoice has its own specific rates that are not applicable to the default rates, then you'd have to manually enter in whatever the invoice amounts are. Okay? Don't go using the calculator because it's only going to apply the default rate. It's not going to apply anything different. And that's what that was, because it wasn't taken into consideration. It says something's not right. I've done this, but the invoice amount says this, but you've paid this. The system's saying, I don't understand, so I'm just going to say that there's something wrong here. Okay, so what it virtually says is you've collected more money as profit, or more money for the invoice, but actually it's not. You've collected more money for the invoice itself, but that should have been put against the tax, and you should have entered less into here and more into here. So it gives you a bit of an idea. If something's not right, you understand, oops, something's happening here, what's going on? Everything's a calculation, everything's a formula, so you may see at times your invoice is about 1 or 2 cents. You can't worry about that, because 1 or 2 cents of a whole scale is nothing. And mathematics, if we were going to the exact figure, everything to an exact figure ends in, there's no such thing as a rounded out number when you're dealing with percentages. It's always 0.00001 of something. So when you're dealing with percentages, it's always rounded up to whatever it is. And that's what you'll see. You'll see represented the round up figure. So occasionally, depending on what the round up looks like, it may say there's 1 or 2 cents left owing. You have to ignore that because that isn't true. Or that isn't what you've actually collected. Okay? So you may see that at times. I see it sometimes, but very rarely. Okay, so I'm going to remark this invoice as paid in full because I unmarked that before. Let's say that you've marked an invoice as being paid in full, but you've gone, oh, that's an accident. Actually, people still owe me money on that invoice, and I've marked it as being paid in full. You can click this, yes, and it comes up and says that this invoice has been recorded as paid in full. You can remark it as not paid in full, clicking that, and now it's changed the status. See that? From back to 2 asterisks. Paid in full, 1 asterisk. Not paid in full, 2 asterisks. So I can just keep switching it backwards and forwards and it will change that for us. Right, what else? What is something else I want to show you on this screen? If we have a look on the right hand side here, we have an accounts receipt icon. That only appears because if I see my setup icon down the bottom here, I've turned that on. If I turn it back off, you notice that disappears. What would that be used for? That is used only for accounts receivables, and only in the example of if I happen to be, let's say this particular gentleman here, this guy here, he mows a lawn for a particular customer. Now, it might be a commercial guy, and he goes ahead, he mows the lawn in the morning, and at night he comes along and he sends them an invoice. He sends them an invoice for every time he mows the lawn, and they normally pay within receiving the invoice 3 or 4 days later he receives a check. But sometimes it doesn't happen that way, and he likes to keep a control record of what they've paid. So he could set up an accounts receivable for this customer, and all he needs to do is he quickly creates the invoice, and then he can record, as soon as he creates it, he can just record that amount against the accounts receivable. So if I quickly have a look over here, let's see what accounts receivable customers I've created previously when I was just mucking around. Mr. Peck's Machines, let's create him an invoice. So let's say that I was doing lawn mowing for this guy and I just finished a job for him. I'm just going to use one of these other invoices I've already created because I couldn't be bothered. So I'm going to, oh, that's already been paid in full. Good on me. Let me just use this one here. I'm just going to edit this one here. Okay, so this here was for Mr. Pex. Mr. Pex. So I'm writing my invoice. I've written it out for Mr. Pex. I've told him that this was for lawn mowing. Okay, and I've charged him $55. Right, now I was told him the date due. Well, maybe I'm not going to point a date due on this for this guy because I know he pays anyway. Now, if you do enter a date due, folks, let's say I entered a date due and I go, oh, I actually want a date due on this. If you put 0, it still puts an amount. It still puts the date back to here. Well, how do I get rid of that date out of this box? Double click on it. If I double click on that box, it will delete the date. So just be aware of that. If you don't want the date, double click on it and it will remove it again if you put it in there and you don't want it there. So now, all I need to do now is just say I've created this invoice and I'm sending this invoice to the client. I've printed it out and I've sent it. I can now record that against his account if I want, and all I've got to do is click Accounts Receivable, record it against Accounts Receivable, yes. This screen will come up. It says here, the little pop-up says select existing or create a new account. So if I haven't previously created an account, I could create an account now. But if I've created this account, Mr. Pex, yes I have, if I just select it, the moment I click that button, it will go ahead, add it to the account, and it will take me back to the invoice screen. We've done that. That's been added to the account. And you will see it's placed an asterisk next to it. It says that this invoice has now been added to an accounts receivable. So if I quickly jump out of there and jump into the accounts receivable, you're going to notice that that invoice, see there's an amount appears there now, before it was 0. And if I jump into the accounts receivable, you will see that that amount exists. Now, you'll notice that I have a figure here because I was testing it and I've already recorded a payment. So previously the amount owing on the account was 0. The moment I added this $55, it now says the current amount owing on this account is 55. I'm going to go into the accounts receivable video, so I'm not going to discuss that any further. We'll jump back into the invoice screen one more time. I think we're nearly finished with all these invoice screen videos. See this icon that says previous F year? It means previous financial year's videos, or previous financial year's invoices. So if you have just got to the end of a financial year and you've switched over to a new financial year, it's natural that you probably still have invoices outstanding from previous financial year. So you can click this screen and it will give you a list of all the invoices previously outstanding. You are not able to edit these invoices or do anything with them. You can record payments received, which will go into this financial year. If you need to edit an invoice, you have to go back to the previous financial year. So I'm going to show you that exists. See how we have on the screen, we have these invoices that are outstanding in 2011. I'm just going to change it as if I've now gone to a new financial year. I'm going to let you see that these particular invoices which have a no written next to them, or that have an amount outstanding, they're going to show up in the next financial year the moment I switch, because they haven't been dealt with. So I'm going to switch to the new financial year, to the next financial year, and just to show you that exists. I'm now in financial year 2012, and there's nothing on the screen. I've created nothing, but if I go to a previous financial year, we now see that it lists all invoices that still have amounts outstanding. See how there's none listed here with 1 asterisk, which means they were paid in full. We don't need to see that for this financial year. It allows us to view a previous financial year's invoice, but it won't allow me to do anything with it. See all these invoices, most of the icons have disappeared. It won't allow me to print. I can't add to the invoice. I can't do anything. It allows me just to simply view it. So I go, yep, that's the invoice I've received. That's the amount outstanding. I can record payments against that invoice now, and they will appear against this invoice. And if I receive a full payment, it will then be recorded as being paid in full, and it will no longer appear on the previous invoice screen. Now, what I want you to do, though, is it doesn't happen that simple. Changing financial years is a little bit more involved in it. I want you to view the video that talks about changing between financial years, because I've done this and you've missed half the opportunity to see what really happens. I've just changed the new financial year very quickly just to show you this particular element of it. Okay, so don't skip that other video on changing to financial years. Okay, I think the invoice videos, I haven't had nothing else at this time to talk about.